The monsters are not the only or even the most revealing thing that nearly keeps Odysseus from getting home. Although Odysseus almost never forgets where Ithaca is, the poem repeatedly imagines ways a person can lose the life toward which he's traveling. Calypso offers Odysseus another existence entirely. The lotus show how home can stop exerting any emotional claim, while the Cyclops awakens Odysseus's need to be known, even when recognition places everything he loves in danger. And the Sirens, they make understanding the past feel more urgent than returning to the future. Each episode gives one human desire so much power that everything beyond it begins to disappear. And most of us know how this can happen. We may still know what kind of life we want, whom we love, or where we hope to end up, while allowing comfort, distraction, pride, or the need to understand what hurt us to pull us steadily away from it. So, by the time Odysseus finally reaches Ithaca, getting home is no longer a matter of just reaching the correct shore. He has to discover whether he can still belong to a life that has spent 20 years learning how to exist without him. And Homer prepares us for this problem by opening the poem without Odysseus. Before we meet the famous wanderer, we see the life his wandering has left behind. Penelope has spent years protecting a marriage that everyone around her increasingly treats as finished. Telemachus has inherited his father's name without ever having the chance to know the man himself. And suitors consume Odysseus's food, occupy his house, pressure his wife, and behave as though his prolonged absence has already become a kind of death. But before Odysseus can confront what his absence has done to Ithaca, he must repeatedly decide whether the life waiting there is still worth choosing. Homer first shows us this through a strangely vulnerable image. When Odysseus finally appears, this commander associated with Troy is actually just sitting beside the sea and crying. He has spent years on Ogygia with Calypso, a goddess who desires him, detains him, and wants him to remain with her. Life on the island would end the danger and exhaustion that have followed him since the war. Calypso even offers him immortality. He could escape aging, death, and every hardship still waiting between him and Ithaca. But he would have to accept endless existence inside a life he didn't choose. Penelope would grow old while he remained unchanged. Telemachus would become a man without him, and everyone Odysseus loves would continue moving through time while he lived forever outside the story they once shared. Truly, Calypso offers him duration without biography. He could continue existing, but the promises, relationships, and choices that made his existence recognizably his would be severed, and his absence from Ithaca would no longer be part of his journey. It would become his final decision. When Calypso reminds him that Penelope is mortal and warns him that suffering still waits ahead, Odysseus doesn't pretend Ithaca will be easier or more beautiful. In the translation that I'm using, he tells her, "Nevertheless, I want to get home and can think of nothing else." So I think there's something very heartbreaking in how little fantasy this answer contains. Odysseus knows that returning means responsibility, conflict, aging, and eventually death. But he wants Ithaca because it is the life to which his history still belongs. Most of us understand why Calypso's offer might be very tempting. When we're exhausted, a life in which no one needs anything from us can sound like freedom. But the relationships and responsibilities that burden us are often woven into our sense of who we are. Calypso can remove every claim upon Odysseus, but she can't give him the meaning those claims created. Now, earlier in the journey, his men encounter a temptation that works quite differently. While Calypso offers another life entirely, the lotus makes the old one stop mattering, because when members of the crew eat it, they lose all desire to continue homeward. Homer spends little time describing the fruit because the important change happens within the men. Remember, though, home has not disappeared, nor have the men's families ceased to exist. It's just the men have lost the ability to feel why any of it should matter. And that is so much more unsettling than a conscious rejection. Now, most of us don't abandon the lives we value through one dramatic choice. We tend to drift through smaller ones. We postpone the call, avoid the conversation, neglect the work that once gave us direction, and repeatedly choose whatever makes the present moment easier. But attention is one of the ways we choose a life. What we return to becomes vivid, and what we repeatedly postpone begins to feel distant. A distraction doesn't have to convince us that something is worthless. It only has to make us care about it less often. So because the lotus has changed what the men want, Odysseus just can't reason them back into their former lives. He drags them to the ships and binds them beneath the rowing benches. From inside the desire created by the lotus, remaining on the island feels like freedom, and Odysseus appears to be the person forcing them away from what they genuinely want, which leaves us with a very uncomfortable question. Should we trust a desire when the condition producing it has cut us off from the memories and commitments that once gave our choices direction? Now, while the lotus threatens home by weakening the desire to return, Polyphemus reveals a different danger. Odysseus can still want Ithaca and yet place it at risk because he can't bear to let the victory remain anonymous. His strategy depends on calling himself nobody, and on the surface, it's a brilliant verbal trick. When Polyphemus cries out that nobody is attacking him, the other Cyclops hear no reason to intervene. But the name does more than confuse them, because for a few crucial hours, it asks Odysseus to surrender the very thing he usually relies upon most, the identity attached to his intelligence, status, and fame. Because nobody cannot receive credit. Nobody cannot be admired. Nobody leaves no story behind. And that is precisely why nobody survives. Odysseus escapes because he allows the act to matter more than the recognition it might earn him. His intelligence works only while he's willing to remain absent from the story of his own victory. But once he's safely at sea, the absence becomes intolerable. While Polyphemus has been defeated, he doesn't know by whom, and Odysseus can't let that go, shouting his name across the water, because survival no longer feels sufficient if no one knows that he was the one who made it possible. But in reclaiming his identity, he gives Polyphemus access to everything attached to it, his image, his homeland, and the future he's trying to reach. And so the name he couldn't bear to conceal becomes the weapon used against him. This makes the episode so much more complicated than a warning against arrogance and pride. Odysseus has built a life around being the man who can outthink danger. The problem begins, though, when he needs that identity confirmed by the very enemy he's already escaped. Protecting the story of who he is becomes more urgent than protecting the people and life that the story is supposed to serve. And I think most of us know this impulse in smaller forms. Think we've already left the argument or survived the humiliation or escaped the person determined to misunderstand us. And then we go back. We send another message or offer another explanation because we can't tolerate the thought that someone may continue carrying the wrong version of us. Now, sometimes correcting the record is necessary, but sometimes the need to be seen accurately just keeps us emotionally tied to people whose understanding should no longer have any authority over our lives. So by the time he reaches the Sirens, Odysseus understands something he didn't when he shouted his name across the water. Recognizing his weakness will not necessarily give him control over it once desire takes hold. So he doesn't prepare by promising to be stronger. He prepares by assuming that in the moment he won't be. So Odysseus instructs his crew to bind him to the mast and ignore him when he orders them to release him, giving these commands while he can still remember the life he wants. Once the Sirens begin to sing, this earlier decision is going to have to protect him from the certainty of his present desire, and he will beg, sound lucid, and feel completely certain. Nothing in his voice will announce that he's become untrustworthy because the voice asking to be freed will still sound like his own. But the Sirens don't lure Odysseus with comfort or forgetfulness. They offer knowledge, claiming to know what happened at Troy, what the Greeks and Trojans suffered, and everything that unfolds across the earth. For Odysseus, who has spent years trying to survive what Troy made of him, this promise must feel almost impossible to resist, because perhaps some part of him imagines that if they can explain everything, they can also make the suffering feel coherent enough to live with. So as I mentioned earlier, before Odysseus can hear the song, he tells his men to bind him to the mast and refuse every order he later gives them, because he understands that intelligence can become the servant of desire. After all, the Sirens don't need to erase Ithaca from his mind. They only need to make their promise feel more urgent. So when Odysseus strains against the ropes, he doesn't believe he's choosing death. He believes he's choosing truth. And the ropes preserve the decision he made before desire taught him how to argue against it. For me, this may be the most unsettling thing Homer understands about human desire. Once we want something badly enough, we rarely experience ourselves as irrational. We become persuasive. We find reasons, exceptions, and urgent circumstances, and then explain exactly why the promise we made earlier no longer applies now, and why this moment is different from all the others. So the danger is that the version of us making the argument now will not be the only version forced to live with the answer. The person who sends the message isn't always the person who has to wake up after it. The person who abandons the commitment isn't always the person who has to rebuild the life it was holding together. So our immediate self gets to speak, while our future self inherits the consequences in silence. And this is exactly what the ropes correct. Odysseus decides, before the song can rearrange his judgment, that the man who only wants release will not be given final authority over his life. And he survives because he understands that freedom doesn't always mean obeying the desire that feels most powerful. Sometimes it means refusing to let one moment decide what the rest of your life will have to become. Calypso, the lotus, Polyphemus, and the Sirens all reveal different ways Ithaca might be lost before Odysseus reaches it. But arriving creates another problem. He has to return without assuming that the life he left still exists as he remembers it. So when he reaches the island, Homer does something really strange. He doesn't let him return as Odysseus. Athena disguises him as an old beggar and sends him into his kingdom under a face no one will recognize, a disguise that allows him to discover who has remained loyal and who has betrayed him. But it also forces him to enter Ithaca without relying on the authority of his name. Telemachus has grown into a man without his father, Penelope has learned how dangerous hope can be, the servants have made choices, and the suitors have built a future around the assumption that Odysseus will never return. So he can't just announce himself and expect the world he remembers to rise around him. First, he has to see what his absence has allowed that world to become. After escaping Polyphemus, he couldn't tolerate remaining nobody. But in Ithaca, he waits. He allows people to misunderstand him and lets the truth of the household emerge before asking anyone to acknowledge who he is. And this restraint may be one of the clearest signs that he is becoming capable of home. Even after the suitors are dead, Homer refuses to make the return simple. Now, while Odysseus has reclaimed his hall, Penelope still has to decide what to do with the man standing before her. Her hesitation shows what 20 years of uncertainty have cost her. She's endured rumors, false reports, and disappointed hopes. She's learned that wanting something to be true can make a person dangerously easy to deceive. So immediate acceptance might reveal only how desperately she wants the story to be true. So she tests him through the bed, instructing Euryclea to prepare their bed outside the chamber, speaking as though it can simply be moved. But Odysseus reacts immediately because the bed can't be moved. He built it around the rooted trunk of an olive tree and constructed the room around it. So moving the bed would require cutting through the tree and destroying what they built. The scene is an identity test, but Penelope doesn't ask Odysseus to prove himself through anything the world knows about him. She doesn't ask about Troy, his victories, or the famous name he once risked everything to protect. She asks, indirectly, whether he remembers the life they made together. And that's exactly what the bed contains. Odysseus built it around a living thing, and then built the room around it. Its secret belongs neither to the warrior who survived Troy, nor to the king reclaiming his home. It belongs to two people who once shaped a life around something rooted. War and exile have changed him, and waiting, grief, and fear have changed her. But the bed doesn't have to prove that their marriage remained untouched. It just has to prove that time has not erased the private language between them. And this is what Calypso could never offer him. She could give Odysseus beauty, safety, and endless time, but not a past built with another person. After all the gods, monsters, war, glory, and fame, Homer brings us here, not to a crowd shouting Odysseus' name, but to a bedroom built around a tree and a woman who remembers. We like to imagine that home is the one place where we won't have to explain who we are, but absence changes the people who leave and the people who stay. Love develops defenses. Survival creates new habits, new loyalties, and sometimes entirely new versions of the people we thought we knew. So Odysseus' return can't be a restoration of the past. It can only be a meeting between the man he's become and the people who learned how to live without him. Home, in the end, isn't where nothing has changed. It's where change has not made recognition impossible. And I think this is why the Odyssey still feels so alive thousands of years later. Most of us are not trying to sail back to Ithaca, but we are trying to return to people, places, relationships, and parts of ourselves that may no longer exist exactly as we remember them. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you want more literature that helps us understand why people love, leave, wait, hurt, and still try to find their way back home, I invite you to subscribe. And please share your thoughts below. What do you think it actually means to come home? Be well.